Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, Making Energy Visible as a Non-Pipe Alternative Solution. My name is Ian Maddock, and I am one of the co-founders and Chief Revenue Officer for MyHEAT, based out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I'll be both the moderator and a panelist in today's discussion. We have a great panel today. Joining me is Rachel Gold from ACEEE and Enrica Galasso from National Grid, New York. We will save about 10 minutes at the end of the presentations for some Q&A. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please submit them in the Q&A section and we'll get to as many of them as we can. With that, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Rachel Gold. Rachel is the Utilities Program Director at ACEEE, where she leads the research and technical assistance on utility regulation and energy efficiency programs. She has over a dozen years of experience in energy efficiency and distributed energy resources, and was at Rocky Mountain Institute and O-Power before joining ACEEE.
Thanks, Ian. As Ian said, I'm Rachel Gold from ACEEE, and just to start, for those of you who don't know ACEEE, we're a nonprofit research organization, and we develop policies to reduce energy waste and combat climate change. So today I'll share an overview of the landscape of non-pipes alternatives. We'll talk a bit about how they're defined, what kinds of technologies can support non-pipes alternatives, what's really driving non-pipes alternatives in the landscape across the country, but particularly in New England and New York, and what are some key considerations for regulators and stakeholders to consider around non-pipe alternatives or solutions. So as you can see, I'll start with non-wires solutions or alternatives. You're probably more familiar with that term. We see much more experience and practice in the industry on the electricity side on this. And as you also probably know, utilities spend really billions each year upgrading the distribution, transmission, and generation infrastructure that we use to meet customer demands. Most of that spending, at least on the electric side, tends to focus on the distribution side. And so non-wire solutions have emerged as a way to achieve that same goal of addressing grid needs, but with portfolios of distributed energy resources that get deployed in specific locations. They can either defer new investments in traditional infrastructure, or in some cases might be able to displace it altogether. So non-pipes solutions, same idea, but for gas capital projects. I've seen a few definitions around the industry. Some of them really focus on distributed energy resources. There are others that take a broader view and really focus more on the ideas that these are third-party solutions that a utility might be procuring from the market. But regardless, the idea is the same, that you're trying to figure out a way to meet system reliability needs at lower cost than traditional infrastructure. So on the next slide, we'll share a little bit about some of the types of technologies that serve as non-pipe alternatives or solutions. As you can see, there are technologies, this is from ICF a couple years ago, both on the demand side and the supply side. Today, for our conversation, we'll really be focusing in on the demand side, and particularly around energy efficiency, but there are really a range of solutions on the supply and demand side that can serve as non-pipes alternatives. And on the demand side, it's not just energy efficiency. We can also think about gas demand response. We can think about electrification as a strategy to enable non-pipes alternatives, sort of a more extreme version of energy efficiency in some ways on the gas side, as well as storage, other kinds of fuel switching, and behavior change. So there's really a wide range of options available to utilities as they think about how they can meet reliability needs most cost effectively for their customers. So what's driving this? Why are we talking about non-pipes alternatives? Next slide will show the first reason, which is just infrastructure constraints. We'll focus mostly on the Northeast today, although these conversations are happening in Canada and other parts of the country as well. But in the Northeast, there has been an increase in natural gas production, but regional demand has grown even faster, driven both by population growth and switching from heating oil. And that's causing constraints or concerns about the ability to provide service, particularly to new customers. And during recent winters over the past few years, some natural gas utilities in the Northeast have been using most, if not all, of their available pipeline capacity to transport natural gas to those centers of demand. And so that's sort of the landscape or the backdrop of the challenge. And it's manifested in a couple of places that have seen moratoriums on new hookups. That happened with Con Ed in Westchester, with National Grid in Brooklyn, Queens, and Long Island. And we've actually seen similar moratoria in Massachusetts, including as early as 2014 for Berkshire Gas and Columbia Gas of Massachusetts. So this is an ongoing trend and something that a lot of folks in the Northeast are thinking about and paying attention to. The next driver is climate policy. So fuel pipelines are identifiable targets for climate activists. There's something that we sometimes see protests around or attention really focused on as an area of concern for activism. And in states like New York that are making really ambitious climate commitments, like, for example, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, we're seeing commitments that mean that we need to think differently about the role of gas on the system. For example, in New York, the goals are to reach 85% of 1990 levels by 2050, with interim targets between them. And Synapse recently found that even if the only emissions that remained in the state were from gas, sales would have to fall by more than 20% to meet that 85% reduction requirement. So we really do need to start thinking deeply about the role of natural gas, and non-pipes alternatives are a really good first step to start thinking creatively, particularly about new constraints that are coming. New York, as well as places like Massachusetts and California, have future of gas or gas integrated resource planning proceedings that are either ongoing or coming up. There are a couple of other states that are considering that as well. And I think this really will be a venue where the issue of non-pipes alternatives will come up, and where we're going to see more conversation about that. And then lastly, the last driver is successful experience on the electric side. Many of the gas utilities that are thinking about non-pipes alternatives have sister companies that have been working on non-wires alternatives for some time. And there's relatively broad experience with non-wires alternatives. This image here shows some selected case studies from around the country, but there's some projections, at least from Navigant, that we expect growth in this market, perhaps reaching as much as 333 million by 2028. So a growth market and a place where we're seeing more emphasis, and in particular for dual fuel utilities, it's a place where there might be some learning across those fuels. However, it's important to note that last year, Wood Mackenzie found that only 40% of non-wires alternatives that have been proposed actually move forward. So there is a bit of a gap between proposal and procurement, or proposal and implementation, and that's something for us to pay attention to as well. Lastly, I wanted to just offer some considerations or factors for folks in the utility sector, be they regulators or utilities or stakeholders, to consider as you're thinking about non-pipes alternatives and how they're coming up. And I'll be really excited to hear how for an implementer and for a utility, some of these issues are coming up in the context of New York. The first is the importance of really robust load forecasting. The whole edifice of a non-pipes alternative relies on having good load forecasting and being able to make a prediction about what the system needs will be in particular areas. So making sure to take into account known changes to efficiency programs, projected electrification, the impact of codes and standards, all of that really adds up to the thinking about, well, what's needed above and beyond what's happening now. The second piece is around robust cost benefit analysis, or benefit cost analysis. As a starting point, energy efficiency as a resource is an important concept, really focusing on all of the system impacts that you can capture. But it's also important to think above and beyond system impacts. Are there impacts that you should be capturing that are related to policy goals? Things like equity, things like greenhouse gas reductions, things like other kinds of pollutants. If those are a part of the policy framework for the state, those should be a part of the benefit cost analysis as well. So it's important to take all of that into account. Next up is stakeholder engagement. someone always says you should engage stakeholders in conversations like these, but I actually think it's really important, particularly in the context of planning, to involve stakeholders early and often in the making of decisions, rather than as sources of information or in more of a perfunctory way. If you don't involve those stakeholders early, it may be too late to select a non-pipe solution later in the process, because these things do take time to develop. So it's important to engage your stakeholders early. And then last but not least, money matters. So we need to find ways to appropriately compensate utilities for and provide cost recovery for non-pipes alternatives. We want utilities to face the incentives to really implement whatever the optimal solution is for their customers and for the grid as a whole, or for their system as a whole, rather. And there are a bunch of different ways to do that, but absent thoughtful consideration of cost recovery, non-pipes alternatives or non-wires alternatives are unlikely to happen. The traditional utility business model is not going to be incentivized to do this. And so, in the context of New York, there are performance incentive mechanisms that could be applied in these cases. Some states look at a percentage of cost, others at a percentage of net economic benefits for a performance incentive structure. And others altogether allow for capitalization and earning a return on the non-pipe solution costs. So there are a few different models or options for how you do cost recovery, but it is important to take that into account because this won't happen in a vacuum or in the traditional business model without some actual action. So I'll wrap it up there and just say we see non-pipes as a really important development, both as a way to drive energy efficiency and as an early example of how to think through some of the broader future of natural gas issues that are arising in states with ambitious climate goals. And next slide, I'll just leave you with a couple of resources to consider for folks who are interested in this topic. The first is the National Standard Practice Manual for Benefit Cost Analysis of DERs, or Distributed Energy Resources. That's a fantastic guide to think through what are the right impacts to take into account when you're doing that benefit cost analysis. And then we have a slightly older piece of work about the role of energy efficiency in a distributed energy future. And that's a reference for, at least at the time, how utilities were thinking about the role of efficiency in distribution planning, particularly on the electric side, but a lot of those lessons apply over on gas as well. All right, Ian, thanks so much and look forward to the questions later.
Great, thanks very much, Rachel. And some great points there, in particular on the benefit cost analysis and the cost recovery. Those are two major components for having success in these programs going forward. And as you correctly point out on the cost recovery, the utilities, it does go against their traditional business model, and they want to have pipe in the ground, or they want to have wires, they want to have these capital assets, and now all of a sudden we're asking them to reduce those. So there has to be some form of compensation for them moving forward. So great presentation, thank you very much for that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Enrica Galasso with National Grid New York. Enrica is a technical specialist at National Grid. She works on energy efficiency and beneficial electrification, new program development, and benefit cost analysis. She is currently focusing on the development on the incremental energy efficiency programs for National Grid's non-pipe solutions. Prior to joining National Grid, Enrica gained experience in industrial energy efficiency assessments and global codes and standards development for HVAC manufacturers. And I'm not sure I understand any of that, Enrica, so you're going to have to tell us all about it.
I'll hold that for the questions piece. So thank you, Ian. So thanks everybody for joining. I'm excited to discuss how we're utilizing energy efficiency as a non-pipe alternative at National Grid. Before I jump into how we're utilizing energy efficiency as one of the tools in our toolbox to relieve the gas demand on our infrastructure, I will discuss first at a high level how we are looking at our gas infrastructure options holistically across the various teams in the company. Back in May 2020, National Grid published its long-term capacity report for natural gas. The report consists of both infrastructure and non-infrastructure available solutions modeled under various scenarios for the demand and supply gap identified in our gas forecast at the time. This chart here on the right shows all the options we've considered in this report As you can see, there are various large-scale infrastructure options as well as distributed infrastructure options. Highlighted in the blue box at the bottom, you will see the no infrastructure solutions, which are also referred to as demand-side solutions. So you can see we are working towards a diverse DSM portfolio, including energy efficiency, demand response, and electrification. For today's discussion, we'll be focusing mainly on the energy efficiency plan and not the full scope of all the DSM solutions. But we head on over to the next slide. As you are likely aware, in New York, we already offer many energy efficiency programs to our customers. These programs work towards meeting our new Efficiency New York regulatory targets for energy efficiency. Those existing NE&Y targets are shown in the graph below for our 2 downstate New York service territories in blue. So per our latest gas forecast model under our high gap scenario, we would need to do significantly more energy efficiency to meet the gap. This incremental energy efficiency needed is shown on these graphs in red. Of course, as with any modeling exercise, these assumptions of incremental energy efficiency may go up and down in the coming years as more recent information becomes available and adjustments are made accordingly to our forecast. So if we move over to the next slide, we will be requesting to obtain these incremental budgets and targets over and above our existing programs in our incremental downstate New York DSM filing. It's an acronym within an acronym, so apologies for that. But these targets will be evaluated annually based on our updated gas forecast. The annual cycle of this filing will allow us to continue to adjust the amount of DSM we propose for the upcoming year according to the most recent data. The first filing is planned for later this year to fund 2020 incremental programs. This will include both incremental energy efficiency programs focusing on weatherization as well as demand response. In addition to our homegrown programs, National Grid is also evaluating NPA market solicitations. So we currently have a supply side RFI out, which will be active through June 8th. And we are also preparing a demand side RFI for fall of 2021. So looking forward to that as well. And if we move over to the next slide, I think as I mentioned briefly on one of the earlier slides, our incremental EE programs will focus on growing and expanding weatherization offerings as a first step. But the portfolio will expand in time to include other demand reduction energy efficiency measures. So weatherization includes building shell improvements such as insulation, air sealing, and window improvements. We chose weatherization for many reasons. So first, we do not currently offer weatherization programs in New York City or Long Island to market rate customers. Therefore, the weatherization programs do not conflict with National Grid's existing energy efficiency portfolio for the new Efficiency New York targets that I mentioned earlier. Weatherization also has a strong correlation with reducing peak energy demand, given that building envelope improvements coincide with reduced energy needed for the gas heating equipment on those very cold nights of the year when our gas peak occurs. In addition, weatherization measures have a long useful life, so it's a reliable long-term solution. And weatherization is also a key component to make homes ready for the possible electrification of heat by reducing heating load. What this means is weatherizing prior to installing a new heating and cooling equipment, such as a heat pump, reduces the amount of energy required for the building to be heated and cooled, allowing the building to be served with a smaller system. The smaller equipment needed will be less expensive than what you would have needed prior to weatherizing, saving customers money when they choose to electrify with products such as heat pumps. So lastly, peer benchmarking with other utilities offerings. Weatherization has been valuable as well to show the effectiveness of weatherization for both the systems and customer standpoint. Currently, we only have weatherization offerings for low and moderate income residential customers, but we are currently developing a weatherization program for residential customers that will offer incentives for market rate customers, which is planned to launch this fall in partnership with our MyHEAT campaign. I will talk about in a moment. We will also be increasing weatherization offerings and incentives for commercial, multifamily, industrial custom projects that go through our existing program for those market segments. On the next slide, I kind of look at how does the customer know if their building can benefit from weatherization. So Weatherization is one of the trickier measures for customers to assess and understand on their own, and often customers aren't aware their building is in need of building envelope improvements. Therefore, our team at Grid looked into how to assist customers in this process in more depth. The classic approach to show customers if their building can benefit from weatherization that many energy efficiency programs offer are energy assessments or audits. The assessments are usually tailored to specific customer segments to inspect the building's potential and need for energy efficiency improvements, including weatherization. Energy audits usually involve an in-person walkthrough or virtual evaluation of the building and technical analysis by a professional. So audits and assessments are avenues we will continue to leverage and provide to our customers at Grid, but we also wanted to identify how do we engage our customers who don't want to take the time or just aren't interested in scheduling this type of assessment. So we realized that the energy assessment approach was a bottom-up approach relying on the customer to make the first step by scheduling the auditor assessment. So we then sought after a more innovative approach that would take place from the top down and educate customers on their building's need for weatherizing prior to the customer needing to make the first step to engage with our offerings. So to reach these customers, we pursued the collection of MyHEAT aerial thermal imaging data. National Grid will utilize MyHEAT thermal imaging data to target customers with the most need to weatherize their home to increase customer participation in our weatherization program. A customer survey we performed showed that 79% of customers are extremely or very likely to enroll in MyHEAT data, likely to access MyHEAT data if available, and 53% of customers are extremely or very likely to enroll in weatherization program after receiving their MyHEAT data and score. So with that, we're excited to launch these initiatives this fall in partnership with MyHEAT, and I will pass it back over to Ian to discuss the technology in more depth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrica, and it's a great summary of the challenges that Grid is facing and what you're looking to do to try to improve things going forward. And as MyHEAT, we're excited to be part of that program going forward. I just want to remind all the attendees to please submit some questions into the Q&A so we can have some great questions with both Rachel and Enrica and their expertise. I think it'd be great to take the time to ask them some questions and learn a little bit more about from their expertise. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the next panelist, who's my favorite MyHEAT employee. As I mentioned before, my name is Ian Maddock, and I've been involved actually in the energy industry for, I call it now 3 decades instead of 30 years because it sounds less, but the bulk of my career was spent in the energy trading and marketing space, dealing primarily with natural gas and electric utilities, and got involved in the MyHEAT project starting around 2016 and been working full-time on it since 2018, and have really benefited from having my past experience of dealing with utilities across North America. I'll tell you a little bit about MyHEAT, give you an overview. MyHEAT's a leading provider of urban thermal mapping focused on energy efficiency. We use a highly specialized sensor that fits to the bottom of a turboprop aircraft, and we fly across the city to collect the data. To date, we've captured and processed over 10,000 square miles of urban thermal imagery, all in North America. And in our processing, we use a very sophisticated mix of algorithms, machine learning, and we combine that with the data that we collect to create specific heat maps and heat ratings for each of the homes and the data that we collect. And one of the key things with that is you may have come across people that have done thermal mapping in the past and look to try and push that into the energy efficiency space. Probably the biggest change and the biggest advancement has been the use of the machine learning to derive useful information from the data. And that's where MyHEAT really stands out as being a leader in the space. Today, we're active across Canada, and in the US, we're active in Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, and with some pending projects in New England as well. As far as the collection of the data, we do it at a mass scale, and we can really do it in a few nights. To give you an example, we can collect a city that's, say, 500 square miles in about 2 to 4 nights. So if you think about that, you're collecting in that space, probably collecting about 350,000 plus buildings where you're collecting the data. We do collect under very strict environmental conditions. So we're looking for a cool, clear, dry evening to do our data collection. We want the materials on the rooftop to cool down naturally so we can get a good contrast between what, when the homeowner has their heat source turned on, what we can see as far as the temperature measured from the home compared to the ambient temperature outside. And with these strict environmental conditions we're typically in the northern tier of North America, collecting in the spring or the fall. For those of you that are in the southern parts, you get a little bit of benefit. And we're probably collecting in late December or January for your areas. And from a homeowner engagement standpoint, we can typically start engaging with the homeowners within about 6 months of data collection, once we're able to process and create the platforms. Various ways that our clients are utilizing the platform. There's obviously the behavioral engagement side of things. We have 3 active randomized control projects going in the US market, and we're going to continue to add on to those. So there's obviously the aspect of people seeing the thermal image compared to people that don't see the image and seeing their behavioral change. And really tied very close to that is the marketing engagement side of things. They do kind of overlap, as all of you know, but they also can be separate budget areas where you have your marketing engagement and behavioral engagement. And what we found is we have clients that on the marketing side of things are utilizing the imagery to engage homeowners and to get them to be part of energy efficiency programs, because you do see a thermal image of your home and it's personalized to you, it's your home, and there's interest in that. So we've had some great success with some projects. We have one going on in Atlantic, Canada right now, where they've been utilizing the imagery in that exact manner, is to engage people on the marketing side and shift them to trying to get engaged in products that are that the utility has on offer there. Obviously, there's the non-pipe side of things that we've been talking about that really allows the utility to look at the data from a system management standpoint, whether it's to look at specific parts of their system or to look at the peak day load in general. And then there's the ability to be really customer specific on your engagement, control the messaging and branding. So if you want to focus on income eligible communities and have targeted messaging to them, branded by the utility, there's that aspect with our data to do that as well. And all of these pieces kind of tied together where you can really identify, segment, and prioritize those high impact homes and neighborhoods to get the largest reduction in consumption on your system. Kind of looking at it from a non-pipe alternative standpoint, the way our mapping looks, and you see the sample on the side there, is just a snapshot of kind of a 35,000 foot level, if you would, of a community. And you can see that there's dark green homes, which would be the efficient homes, and dark red homes, which would be the inefficient homes. And it really gives our utility clients that visual guide to really see what communities they should be targeting. And if you layer in publicly available census data, like income eligibility, age of the occupants, age of the homes, and layer in your own consumption data that you have, you can be very targeted about who you want to engage with. So this gives the ability of the utility to look at the entire distribution system in this heat map format. We'd work with your internal GIS departments, if you have one, to help them to kind of layer over top that data so they can look in and see where these areas fall within your distribution system. And you can really use it to target specific neighborhoods and homeowners to get that reduction in consumption. So again, on the example here on the right-hand side, you see that that green area. If that's a new community that the utility is looking to expand into, but you like National Grid, have the challenge of getting new pipeline capacity to bring into your area, using our tool and a robust weatherization program, you can look at the adjacent communities that have these inefficient homes, and you can do a targeted messaging campaign to very specific homeowners to get that reduction in consumption, to free up gas molecules and space on the system to be able to add those new customers. And if you kind of zoom out and look at the entire system, you can really look to utilize it to focus on your peak day demand, as Enrica correctly pointed out, with the challenges that they have with that as well. And then from that, our heat maps and heat ratings really highlight where the greatest impact can be made. So not only is the visual aspect that you see of these red homes and these green homes, we have a heat rating system that runs from 1 to 10. 1 are the most efficient homes and 10 are the least efficient homes. So using that data that's derived from the machine learning aspect and the visual data from the thermal, we can be very specific about the homeowners that we want to target. As far as the homeowner's journey, they would receive from their utility a homepage that looks similar to this here. This would be they would receive a marketing message from the utility, whether it's an email or a mail out, and they would have a personalized access code or QR code that would send them directly to their own personal homepage. So they wouldn't see any of their neighbors' homes, or their neighbor wouldn't see their home. You wouldn't be able to see your parents' home. This is specifically to the homeowner. And the journey kind of going from left to right on this page for the homeowner is they have that MyHEAT heat rating and showing them how they rate in that 1 to 10 score, and also how they can, so there's the social comparison of how they compare to the neighborhood they live, as well as the city that they live in. And then in the middle is that pseudo-colorized image that shows the areas that are having the greatest amount of heat loss. And with our imagery, even though it's a rooftop image that we're collecting, we will get thermal bridging. So for the example, in this particular slide here, in this image of this home, on the bottom of the screen there of the image of the home, you see a band of red across there. That would be from the quality of windows or cavity wall that the heat is rising up, and we can see that in our imagery. The homeowner can toggle back and forth between this image and the Google Maps version of their home to get a feel for where the front of their house is, the back of their house, and most homeowners have a pretty good intuitive aspect of their home, and they'd be able to explore these areas and have a feel for areas that need to explore. And then on the right-hand side, we designed the quick links to the programs that are on offer from the utility, and we'll have the click through for them to go through to start participating in programs. This is all white labeled to look like, in the instance with National Grid, this will be white labeled to look like a National Grid page, and we'll direct our clients to the National Grid programs that are available. Our click-through rates, when a homeowner sees this image and are at this stage of having looked at their homepage, when they click through to those links, our click-through rates are over 30%. So a pretty high percentage of people, and it's because this image is so personalized and it is their home, and people are genuinely interested in trying to improve their homes. I'll just touch on a few sort of existing projects that we have and some of the results that we have, and some more kind of survey results. And I won't go into all of these, but I'll just touch on a couple of the key ones. On the program uptake and behavioral response side, in a project we had here in Canada, that was a randomized control trial run by a third party for people that saw the MyHEAT image of their home versus control group that did not receive any information. There was a 30% higher participation in weatherization program from the MyHEAT group. And also, very interestingly, from a marketing standpoint, there was again, from that MyHEAT group that saw the image versus the control group, almost a 20% increase in all other online energy efficiency rebates. So it really speaks to the fact that that image drives people to want to learn ways to improve the efficiency of their home. And just touching a little bit more on the perception via the surveys that have been done, I'll just kind of point to the bottom two there, where with Enrica, with the National Grid one that they did when they sent out the response to the homeowners, 100% of the respondents came back and said that it would increase or maintain their opinion of the utility by providing a tool like this. And then in another recent survey that we did in the US Northeast for a combined gas and electric utility, 97% of the respondents said that it increased or maintained their opinion of the utility, which, from a standpoint of your customer base, that's really great feedback to see that, providing something that's unique to them, that's personal to them, and can help them save money, increase the comfort of their home, and make their home more enjoyable to be in. I think that's really great information from the utility's perspective. This is just a snapshot of some of the companies that we're dealing with in the US, and we have a number of parties that we're in various stages of discussions with as well. And then I'll just finish off with this image here of kind of our Unleash the Power of Energy Made Visible, which again, you can really see the power of the image and how that can really help homeowners to see where their home could be in need of some help from our great utility friends that are providing great programs for them. And with that, I think we'll stop the share, and maybe we'll see if we can get to see if there's any specific questions that have been asked. Just give me a moment to go here. And I think and again, I encourage people to send some questions in here. We could certainly use some more here. This one's for Enrica. Enrica, the first slide that scored different capacity planning approaches showed a low score for energy efficiency. Can you explain why EE is considered, in brackets, unattractive from reliability and from a reliability standpoint? I can't even speak. From a reliability standpoint, and is that perspective fair or changing?
Sure, yeah. I think it was pretty medium on the reliability. It's possible if the slide can pop up and I can take a look at those circles again. But, there's a lot of assumptions when we're making how much energy efficiency our programs producing, and QCing every customer and every installation, I think, is just that reliability piece. It's very reliable, the approach of our programs when you're comparing to kind of DSM, but I think when you're comparing to, an infrastructure being available versus expectations of, the program, there is some uncertainty with savings depending on how it's being calculated and QC process. So that is something we're working actively to improve. But I'd say there's high reliability, and it's just what we're comparing against sometimes. Looking at specifics and comparing against one versus the other, I think you may need to weigh different pros and cons in every scenario. But in general, I think reliability for energy efficiency may not be up to par with some of the systems, but is definitely not a deal breaker with any of these, and a necessity to do energy efficiency as one of the options in getting to that solution. So thank you, and sorry, thanks, Ian. I know you might have stopped presenting, and that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, it took me a while to find that, but anything more you wanted to add on that, Enrica?
And I think when looking at it, it may be as well when you're looking at how far can you go for how long of a period is energy efficiency going to meet your need. And there is a tipping point where you've kind of saturated some of these programs, even with increasing incentive levels when you look at more customer adoption. So I think that would be another piece in terms of reliability and the measure life of the energy efficiency being conducted. But thanks, great question.
Great, and I have one here for Rachel. In a number of states, we've seen a lot of non-wires or non-pipe alternatives get identified, but then not move forward to implementation. What are some of the barriers in the way?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So there's a few things that can get in the way. In some places, it's a matter of a difference between a requirement to identify alternatives, but not necessarily a requirement to execute on those alternatives. So there are some parts of the country where utilities now have planning requirements, but those planning requirements don't also necessarily relate to using the alternatives that are brought forward. It's that the alternatives have to be brought forward. So that's one sort of framework thing that might make a difference, as in like what is mandated or what is required of the utility. Another is that the timing really matters for this. So the timing of when the RFP or RFI happens, the timing of how long it takes to procure customers for an energy efficiency provider or demand response provider, that may or may not line up with the timeline that the utility has in order to meet the need. And so that's really important as well, is to make sure those timelines line up. And then siting and permitting issues, it's less of an issue for energy efficiency, but on the storage side, that can be a challenge. That's also a challenge for some of the more traditional infrastructure as well. And then lastly, I think the strength of relationships between DER providers and utilities can really matter. Is the utility approaching this like a platform? Is the utility in a space where they really want to find solutions that make sense? That will help to lead to success as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Rachel. Enrique, I have another one for you. I'm really interested in how National Grid is addressing the challenge of needing a proactive customer action to start the process. I realize this is early in your process, but can you share a bit more about how you're approaching that initial customer engagement, in brackets, how you manage the initial contact and how you introduce the offer?
Yes, definitely. So the great thing about, I guess, when we're prioritizing to start sending out this information to customers is how do we engage? And I think we will prioritize those customers that we identify through the ratings from MyHEAT of who is in the most need of weatherizing, who has those 8 and 9 and 10 scores that indicate poor installation of those buildings. And we will be prioritizing, based on that, as well as locationally where the need is, as well as, prioritizing low and moderate income communities as well. So we're going to take various approaches in how we outreach, but at the same time, we will be making sure, we've collected this data and provide accessibility to all customers, about their home and this information we've been able to collect for them. So, still early stages, and we're working very closely with MyHEAT and our marketing teams to build that engagement.
Thanks, Enrica. And Rachel, I have another one for you. Are there other reasons to focus on weatherization as a non-pipe solution that we haven't discussed?
Yeah, there are. So weatherization is probably an exciting thing to focus on amongst the many energy efficiency options, and even amongst things like electrification and demand response, because it's one of those solutions that really has a whole stream of benefits. One is that, of course, you get benefits on the gas system. There also might be benefits on the electric system. So particularly in the Northeast and New York, if you are able to reduce the heating load for a building, that could prepare that building for future weatherization and might enable you to reduce the potential for winter peaks from that building or home in the future. Weatherization also really helps with indoor air quality and making healthy homes. So that can be there can be some great advantages there. And lastly, weatherization work can't be exported. You can't send that to another country. It's all local jobs. It's all work that happens in a community. And so there's a real advantage from that as well.
No, great points, great points. Next question is the thermal data primarily showing thermal losses through roofs? And maybe I can just, now that I've finally got this back up in here, I can just address this by kind of showing you the visual on this slide again. And yeah, we do get obviously the great view of the rooftop of a building, but when you, as I mentioned, kind of the thermal bridging aspect of the imagery that we get in this particular home, this home has an attached garage that's not heated. And what we're seeing, and even though it's kind of from an aerial view, is we're seeing where you have a poorly insulated cavity wall between the home and the garage and the uninsulated garage. So we can see where heat is escaping from this heated home into this garage and then out the uninsulated walls. And you can see again the heat escaping through the sides of this garage through the uninsulated. So to answer your question, yeah, we can see more than just the rooftop view. I'll just check to see what other questions we may have. This one I think may be to all panelists. We'll see if there's who wants to jump on this one. With all of the focus on homeowners, this effort seems to target rich white households that energy efficiency programs have traditionally focused on. What efforts are being made to target single family rentals and multifamily where people of color are more likely to live? Any of the other panelists want to address that one?
I can jump in quickly just to give a broad landscape. I think I'll be curious to hear about New York, where I know that a number of the policies have specific carve-outs to ensure that there's a focus on delivering benefits to low-income customers and disadvantaged communities. I think weatherization is a very important solution for low-income customers. In the U.S. Weatherization Assistance Program, the federal program is in fact focused on serving those customers. You also mentioned rentals and multifamily. There are particular challenges there, and you need particular program designs that help to address the split incentive, that help to address both the individual unit as well as common areas when you start to talk about multifamily. So those are really important questions. There are probably 50 or 60 at least utilities around the country who are working on those types of programs. We have a working group at ACEEE of those folks who work together to come up with solutions around that. But yeah, it's a really important question, and weatherization is one of the top tools to help serve those customers.
Enrique, anything to add on your side?
Yeah, no, I would echo what was said, and on our end, there's many, there's working group meetings I think taking place today between all the utilities in New York, specifically on low and moderate income multifamily. buildings and how we better serve, especially as it relates to weatherization. So there's a lot of focus, a lot of time being spent on identifying business models, as well as, there's pilots that a lot of my colleagues are working on as well, and in terms of how to engage both the building owner and the tenants in an effective way, in the type of more innovative models that are being worked out in these pilots. And I think those are some exciting opportunities for the market, and looking forward to incorporating those in our non-pipe alternatives as well.
Yeah, thank you for those responses, ladies. Now, to add from MyHEAT's perspective is, we work with our utility clients and look to help pinpoint those income eligible communities and known income eligible communities, and we can help drive specific messaging with specific offers to the homeowners in those communities as well. Next question. This is, as a National Grid customer, I noticed my solar panel showed up as heat leaks in the thermal image of my home. Is MyHEAT aware of that possibility, and then is there a workaround? Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a little bit trickier one. During the processing of our imagery, we do correct for different rooftop materials to be able to normalize the temperature and readings. Solar panels are a little tricky to detect and correct for, but that's a great problem to have, because obviously if you have the solar panels on there, that's a great step forward. But we're constantly looking into new ways to use machine learning to identify and detect these different aspects of rooftops. So this is something that we are thinking about and we'll continue to make improvements on. Great question. Thank you very much for bringing that up. And here's one, I think this is for Enrica. What types of weatherization retrofits are being considered to offer in this and other projects you see? Are deep retrofits being considered?
Yes, we are focusing on getting to those deeper savings. Our program, both on the commercial and residential space, will focus on insulation, air sealing, both attic walls, as well as window replacements, which I'm not sure if this is the case with every state, but windows have been a challenge sometimes to incorporate into energy efficiency programs. But due to our gas constraint and our needs, we are incorporating those deep retrofits and working towards finding the solutions for our customers that will give them a holistic whole building approach.
Great, thank you, Enrica. I have another one for you. You're a very popular panelist. How long is the process from start to finish, from identifying the need for a non-pipe alternative to choosing solutions and rolling out the program or programs?
Yeah, I'd say, I guess there's two different parts of that in terms of getting rolled out with our initial plan. It did take about a year or two to kind of really define energy efficiency. We took a look at what we're currently offering, where we have the most opportunity to grow and weatherization, and then spent past few months building the business model that we think would drive most market penetration and grow as quickly as possible. I think, and then the difference in kind of designing is you really want to think of not only how do I launch a program to hit an existing goal, but how do I create a program that's going to penetrate the highest percentage of the market as quickly as possible. So I think there was a lot of differences in kind of thought process when we look at it from an MTA perspective versus hitting regulatory target perspective when it comes to program design. But in terms of timeline, I think it's a typical standard process as with many other energy efficiency program development. And I think when we look at the holistic approach, it is never ending. We're always going to be every year going back, looking at our new gas forecast, adjusting where the need is, talking to the stakeholders and vendors and our program managers on what is the opportunity to grow for these programs, how is it progressing, and what level of energy efficiency can we identify for future forecasts that we want to incorporate as we grow and build and learn. So it is a continuous process when we think about it as a long term, and the entire 10 to 20 years of really managing our gas infrastructure and providing the energy efficiency and the gas services to our customers in the most effective way.
Yeah, some great points there, Enrica. You know, it's really important to from the behavioral side of things to continually drive messaging to the homeowners, because they may for example, they may receive some messaging in the heart of the heating season where they have high bills, and it's kind of driving them to think about weatherization and changing things. But the reality is those types of projects are done maybe in the spring or the summer. So you really have to continue to have that behavioral messaging to engage with people. And we're all probably procrastinators at heart with some of these projects. So we do need time for it to soak in, and or literally to have something soak in to force you to make some changes to your home to make things improve them and make it better. Looks like there's a question here for MyHEAT. Does MyHEAT, I didn't say we're called MyHEAT, I gotta remember that. Does MyHEAT create or maintain relationships with specific contractors in mapped areas, since customers are expected to make changes to their home after seeing their heat loss levels? Quick answer to that is no. We work directly with the utilities or with implementers that are running programs for the utilities, and they typically have local contractors that are part of those programs. So MyHEAT provides the data, works with the messaging for the homeowners to engage, help the utilities engage with the homeowners and drive them through to their programs. And if there's kind of approved installers that are available through the utilities network or through their implementer network, is typically where we would see the contractors come into play. With that, I don't see any more questions or any final ones that are coming through. I think that's it for questions, and I think we're actually pretty good timing. I think we're just 5 minutes here from time. So with that, I want to thank Enrica and Rachel very much for taking the time, not just today to do the webinar, but for the work that they put in to create their slides and spend the time on creating what I think has been a great topic. So thank you very much for everyone who joined, and look forward to participating in another panel in the future.
Thanks for having us, Ian.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.